Is it working? 1, 2, 1, 2. Let's see. How do I screen share? Okay. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, the volume doesn't seem very high. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hello, Miss Nosway. You're gonna have to really be patient with me because this is my first stream, and I'm trying to figure out how to do things like screen share, etc. So I'm not sure how successful this is gonna be, but thank you for joining. Stream marker, set add. Let me know if you got any questions in the meantime whilst I'm setting up here. I hope this goes okay. Very much hope this goes okay. How's it going, people? Thank you for joining. Let me know if you can hear me. Well, I'm guessing if you can't hear me, I won't get a response, so I'll probably have to type that message in. Audible. Am I audible? There you go. I've typed it in and I'm asking you, can you hear me okay? Because this stream is not really going to work unless I can share images. So I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen at the moment. Excellent. Okay, brilliant. You can hear me loud and clear. Thank you very much for the feedback, Kenyatta. Okay. Now to overcome the next hurdle, which is screen sharing. This is not as easy as. Thank you all those who are joining me live here. Don't worry, we'll be underway soon. I have a feeling we'll get it underway soon. I'm just trying to. There's not many options on my screen, so I'm kind of like a little bit lost. There must be options for sharing screen. Here you go. Webcam. Pop out dashboard. Manage. Stream. Oh, this is annoying. Come on, let me share my screen. I may have to do a little bit of a software change or update. You might not be able to do it in the online version, which would be a bit annoying. I might have to like download something. I'm not going to give up just yet. Just bear with me. I've got so much good stuff that I want to share. I was going to edit this video. I'm not sure if you've seen the title because I'm not sure how this has gone out. I haven't done any warning. I literally just went live with it. I've kind of prepared a little bit of a presentation as a walkthrough of a visit that I did to the British Museum, and I found some really good treasures there and things that I'd love to discuss with you guys as a community, but can't do that at the moment until I figure out how to share. And it's the first time I've clicked live, and there's kind of no live training button. You kind of got to just go live and figure it out on the fly, which is a little bit annoying. I thought it wouldn't be that difficult, but lo and behold, here I am. So Yeah, webcam. That's fine. Public. Yeah, playlist. Right now, someone just asked me, streaming platform. Right now, I'm literally just using the YouTube Studio, and I was hoping that they'd kind of give me that option to at least select a screen, because that's all I need. I only need to share pictures with this. You don't need to actually see me in this stream. So I'm probably doing it wrong, which is what I'm kind of figuring out now. Unfortunately, it's a shame since I've got everyone live. I have OBS, so that's what I have installed on my system. I have OBS, which works great. The topic, Carolyn, is it's a visit to the British Museum, and I want to share some of the things that I saw. I obviously took pictures, so this is a visual walkthrough and a bit of a discussion, but I can't seem to figure out how to share pictures. I can't, unless I hold up my book pages to you guys, which is not going to be very good. Not going to be the best kind of experience. I need to figure out how to share this folder that I've got. So don't worry, bear with me. I'll get there. If I don't get there, I may come off and come back on. So just bear with me. I'm going to look for another minute or two. Let's see if I can figure this out. 1 second, right click. Picture and picture. What's that? No, I don't think that's worked. Cast. No, that's no good. Show all controls. Yeah, unfortunately. Oh dear. It's looking like I'm gonna have to give up on this stream. I'm really sorry, guys. I'm going to, you know what I'm going to do? Apologies, those of you who have joined me. I'm going to have to reschedule this. I'm gonna probably do it at some point tomorrow. Same topic. I'm going to schedule it in, and I'm going to figure out. I would like to speak to you guys, but I feel like you're gonna find it incredibly boring, me just talking here today. I guess I could talk for a bit longer, but I don't know how. I don't know how interesting that will be. I could tell you what. Either which way, I'm definitely going to reschedule for tomorrow on this topic. And in between now and then, I'm going to figure out how to use the YouTube software. I thought it was going to be relatively intuitive, and obviously, it's not. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to download something and do a few tutorials, but I can do that. I'd imagine it won't take more than a day for me to get up to speed. So I'll schedule this for tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm here, and I obviously very much appreciate and love you guys as a community. If anyone has anything they want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, no, I can't even show you that. I'm just so Josiah, who's just said, we want to see the artwork. Yeah, that I'd like to show that too, but I don't even have to share my screen at the moment. So that's kind of my situation here. So apologies about that. Yeah, just to actually keep you up to speed whilst you're here, since I've got a few people online. It's not loads, obviously people are dropping off, which is absolutely fine. But I did have an interview yesterday with a radio host called Ramesses Jar. I don't know if any of you've heard of him, but he's on something called the Black Independent Network, or the Black something network, based in America. And I had a really good interview with him yesterday. So that's going to be dropping on his YouTube channel. I think it's going to drop as a podcast during the week, but I think he's going to upload it to his YouTube channel as well on Monday. And we had a really, really, really interesting conversation. So yeah, I will share that with my community. Obviously, you guys to kind of like tune into that interview, because that was good, and I cover a lot of my background and stuff like that. So yeah, tell us about yourself, as in how you got into doing this work. You'll find that out on the interview. So that will be a good question for you because I'm asked that very same question. And I think I give a better answer on that. So that's going to be uploaded really, really soon. So don't worry, you won't have to wait for more than another day or so to kind of get a nice detailed version of that answer. Um, I'm really disappointed that I haven't been able to show you guys something a bit more substantial today. That would have been a really good topic. But don't worry, one day it's not gonna, it's not gonna hurt anyone. It's not gonna kill anyone. We'll go live in around 24 hours, exactly the same topic. I'll have everything prepared like I have today, but I'll have figured out how to actually share those screens with you, and yeah, and then we can have a really good chat. I think going live is quite important because um, I do like editing my videos, as you can imagine, and uploading them. But this is a really long topic, and I imagine that when I start going through these images and talking about them, it could go on for hours, and that's going to be, I feel, a little bit long-winded as a as a topic for us to kind of like tackle on an edited video. But if we're doing it live, I think it'll be a lot easier for people to kind of digest. There'll be less expectations in terms of how well it's being edited. Doesn't really matter that much, so I will be doing that. Okay. Better than Paris, what does that mean? What's that mean, better than Paris? What did I miss there? Sorry, explain that. Black Egyptian artwork has been coming out a lot in the news lately. I know, it's really, I think it's really good that well, basically you've got kind of two things happening at the moment, and I did touch on this in my interview with Ramesses Jar. The What's been happening is channels like mine, and obviously I'm quite new to this. I'm not gonna take loads of glory for this. Absolutely not. There've been people like Home Team History, Mr. Imhotep, um, Kiru Miao, How, Straight Up. There's so many channels right now. Um, Kweki May, Kweli Mika, Kweli Mika. Thank you. I have to say his name properly. That's a disrespect. Um, there's so many channels right now that you can find where basically, there's a massive proliferation of Black history being shared, and it's real Black history. It's not kind of like Black history as controlled by the cabal. It's real Black history that is very dangerous to the establishment because it challenges what's been put out there. And as information is becoming more readily available, and I think as Black people are becoming independent researchers and taking a much more front seat approach to how our history is being revisited, I think there's a realization that it's almost like, the cat's out of the bag now. And so they're going to create little fires, stoke up fires to try and discredit. And I think that's one of the things that they're trying to do with this whole kind of Cleopatra thing. I think they wanted to create controversy, and they wanted to overreact with this. I think it was quite important that they really overreacted with this. So it's not about whether or not it was justified. It's not about whether or not it looked like Cleopatra or it didn't look like Cleopatra. But what they needed to do was really overreact. And the hope is that they're going to scare, people like me, people who are sharing the truth, and overly discredit the movement. And the movement is obviously people sharing real history, sharing objective real history that shows that melanated people have contributed a lot to history. And when I say a lot, that's an understatement, to say the least. We've contributed, a considerable amount to where we are now, as people in history. And so they are going to try their best to really undermine it. So you see terms like Afrocentric being used as an insult now. You see terms like blackwashing being used as an insult now. This is all a psyop, so to speak, a way of basically really discrediting. You come out with dismissive euphemisms to just basically say it's not worth it listening to these people because they're just blackwashers or they're just Afrocentrists. And the irony of it is that, whitewashing is what's been taking place, in global history now for over 200 years. We've been getting nothing but whitewashed history. But they're going to overreact to this one documentary, which, to be honest with you, isn't even far off the ball. But they really want to try and put a lid on what we're doing. But it's too late. They can't put a lid on what we're doing, and they can't put a lid on the enlightenment that's taking place and the fact that Black people are claiming their history. They cannot put a lid on that. So it's quite an exciting time that we're in at the moment. and I'm loving it. I am getting a load of hate on my posts now, and particularly my shorts. I'm getting, I think, lots of programmed bots. I'm getting lots of, communities of kind of, I don't want to use the wrong word, but I'm just going to say it, white supremacists, essentially, just kind of like really coming down on anything that I post now. Um, so I've obviously, tweaked the radar of several, groups who don't like black people essentially, being aware of their history. So that's what's taking place at the moment. But yeah, it's quite interesting. Um, I'm taking my time. Love, lots of love there, Shasha. The artworks are so amazing and magnificent that you can't imagine human hands carved the artistry. I agree with that. And actually, there's a lot of there's some backstory to that, Jay, because the reality is a lot of people are very unaware of the fact that they have no idea how the ancient Egyptians created their artworks. And to be clear on that, most of the ancient Egyptian sculptures that you see are created out of granite or granodiorites. Now, this material, they've basically told the public that ancient Egyptians only knew how to smelt iron. That's as far as the technology went. So in terms of ancient Egyptians, they were a an iron smelting society, but they never progressed beyond that. Now iron is totally useless um, at carving granite. Granite's a harder rock than iron is a metal. So if you try to carve granite using iron, essentially, iron will melt or will bend before it's able to have an impact or serve an impact on granite. So they've got all of these statues that we are faced with that they have zero idea how they were created. Egyptologists, historians have no idea. We talk about the pyramids and we talk about these things, but they have no idea how they created these granite statues. You can't do this. This is, laser, essentially laser precision technology that's been used to create these. Yeah, that's what we're kind of confronted with, and they have no idea how they created these granite statues, and yet they're so quick and so dismissive to this, to classify the ancient Egyptian civilization as this and to act like they know everything that they were about, and they have no idea. So it's not just the pyramids, it's literally everything they do. So even the artwork that we're in awe of is, these massive, colossal heads, like the one of Amenhotep III that's in the British Museum that I'm going to share with you, the colossal head of Ramesses II. These are all made of granny diorite. They have no idea how these were carved. They haven't got the foggiest. The closest they've come is they've suggested that, if you kind of pour sand on granite and then you kind of rub it with something that's made out of iron, the sand, the friction there will basically allow you to start to make an indentation onto something that's granite, but that won't allow you to carve an accurate statue. At best, that will allow you to maybe create a straight gash. That's the best that you could do there. There's no way you're going to be able to carve an intricate statue. There's technology there. They have no idea that, how the Egyptians created what. So in terms of the ancient Egyptians' ability as a civilization, the kind of things and the technology that they had, this isn't something they've even come close to explaining or cracking. It's literally just totally ignore it. So it's really interesting to see. Watching from the Gambia, thank you, Drake G, for tuning in. Bantu Queen, what's going on, sister? Keep on, keep going. They mad. Yeah, they mad. They big mad. They're big mad at the moment. It's amazing to see. I get so much just anger. People are just like, I'll tell you one of my funny comments actually. It was when I reacted to Cleopatra, the whole Cleopatra thing, and someone said, "You're not a king, you're a fool." I don't know why I found that so hilarious, because it's like, I don't call myself a king. King's just kind of like a moniker, but it's hilarious because you could just, the anger is palpable. People are really indignant about the kind of things that we're doing on this channel. and what this community kind of knowledge that we're kind of proliferating on this community, the kind of discussions that they have, they're indignant. They don't, they have, there's a lot of fear for some reason. And I'm not going to start speculating the reasons why. I'm sure you guys can think of, but there's a lot of fear about melanated people knowing what their ancestry is. I mean, like really knowing what we contributed to society. Yeah, it is something. It was coordinated, not probably. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Certainly was. Should our people had been left alone, our world would have been more balanced. Yeah, it's really interesting, just you keep making interesting talking points there, Giselle. Because as I research history, I I'm also slightly disappointed because I had a very black and white view on history. And I think when I simply had the viewpoint that, black civilizations were African, things were a lot simpler for me because I kind of had this kind of like, Africa good, invading forces, Europeans bad. But then you start to learn that actually, the Moors were melanated people as well. But then even beyond the Moors, some British monarchs were melanated, and melanated at a time when not all good Britain weren't doing good things. So that's when history becomes really complex. So it's not kind of a black and white, good and bad thing. It's just a really complex thing. It's really complicated. When I share some of the stuff from the British Museum, you're gonna see where I'm coming from. But our history is literally global as melanated people. We are literally indigenous to every continent on the planet, and this is one of the things that's not touched on. We are we have been, part of the citizenship and the ruling class of every continent on this planet, and I'm certain of that given the research that I've done. So obviously on this channel I talk a lot about ancient Egypt. It's a great starting point, but it certainly isn't the limit of melanated contribution to civilization across the world. So, but then once you open that kind of worms, it's not just the kind of worms for the establishment, it's also the kind of a kind of worms for me personally as a melanated person, and for the community, our community out there. We're gonna be confronted with information that is going to challenge us. You know, if for instance, let me give you an example. It's really, and if those of you who have been on Kiru, Ku- Kuri Miao Ahal's channel will know some of this information. Okay. When you think of Columbus as a Spanish, Italian, non-melanated person, a white person, perhaps coming over to America, doing all the deplorable things he did, it's easy, you condemn Columbus. I hate Columbus. Don't tell to me about Columbus. He didn't discover nothing. Screw Christopher Columbus. We've all said that. I've said it definitely. I say it to this day. Evil man, blah, blah, blah. Where it gets complicated is, what if Christopher Columbus had black people in his fleet, as in black Spaniards, Moors? That's where it gets complicated, because then it's like, oh, history's not as black and white as I thought it was. I know I'm going a bit deep here, but this is one of the things that I've had to kind of start to really kind of figure out about history. It's such a blurry thing, and it's a really scary thing, because it's like I haven't got this kind of like this air of righteousness that I used to have when I said like, well, I'm from the black community, so to speak, and we're righteous, godly people, who always do right, and we were living as peaceful people before the European came and disturbed us. And then you realize history isn't that black and white. It's actually really gray, which is really interesting. So, either way, it's history. History is history. So we're gonna have to accept the good with the bad, because we're gonna see ourselves in people that we like, but we're also gonna perhaps see ourselves in people that we don't like. But then truth is truth. Are we willing to embrace truth even when it's inconvenient to what we believe? That's challenging. That is challenging. So I didn't really go that deep. In fact, this is not prepared at all, but this is just what's come up. Okay. You gave King Tut some justice because that whitewashed picture they kept showing was trash. Agree. Total trash. Total trash. I really hate that reconstruction. And I think actually what's really interesting about the King Tut reconstruction, that actually brings me on to another point, is that when they were, when they're hiding something. Here's kind of a little bit of a side note. They will use disabilities as the reason. When they're using disabilities, they're normally hiding something. Okay, so for instance, when before they'd done any testing on Akhenaten, you would have heard all the stories about the fact that they believed that Akhenaten had Marfan syndrome and this, that, and the other, and blah 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 blah. Now, the reason they came out of all of that is because Akhenaten had facial features that were clearly and overtly normally restricted to African people. So they had to come out with some kind of a disability to explain why he had full and thick lips. Because if you put those lips, as you've seen on an African, like I did with Akhenaten's reconstruction, it looks perfect. It's like, yep, that looks great. But if you put those features on something that's more European, now it looks weird. So we're going to explain away that weirdness with disability. And they do that a lot. So for instance, if you look at some of the monarchs from Europe, some of the monarchs, if you go back to kind of like 16th and 15th century, they'll say they had something called Habsburg jaw. Now, Habsburg jaw is literally prognathism. Prognathism is something that loads of Africans have. I would say maybe like 50% of the African population possess Habsburg jaw, where the lower half of your face basically protrudes further forward than the upper half of your face, whereas with Europeans it tends to just like go straight down. So I have mild prognathism. Now, when that appears in monarchs, they call it Habsburg jaw. So you'll see a coin, and from the sideways, you'll be like, wait a second, this guy kind of looks like he could be African. They'll be like, no, he has Habsburg jaw, So they have the names, they've got disabilities for the names of features that we simply have, If you look at the skeletal remains of King Tut's skeletal remains are super tropical. Thank you, Black Rampage. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you, brother. King Tut's features, his limb proportions are super tropical. Super tropical basically means that if outstretched arms, a European has a 1-to-1 ratio, i.e., if you outstretch your arms, that is basically the same as your height. Okay, in a European, that's basically code adapted limb proportions. That's what most Europeans have. Okay, so the length of your arm span basically is equal to your height. Tropical Africans, so that's people like myself, people maybe from the West Africa, equatorial regions, etc., tend to have a 10% greater arm span. So if you watch boxing, for instance, you'll notice that black fighters tend to have a longer reach. That's because we have tropically adapted limb proportions. So we tend to have like 1.1 to 1.12, etc. And then if you go to the Far East, so when I say Far East, East Africa, not the Far East. If you go to East Africa, you get super tropical limb proportions. These are the limb proportions that you get on like East African runners. So, like the Kenyan runners, the Somalians, the Ethiopians, and theirs tends to be like 20% greater than their arms, than their height. So their arm span will be like 1.2 or 1.25. Now, King Tut clusters in the plus 1.2. So he has super tropical limb proportions. So his limb proportions are literally super African, basically. That's the way you could describe it. King Tut literally has super African limb proportions. That should be it. That's kind of like home run, end of discussion territory. The guy's got super tropical limb proportions. He's definitely an African. That's just, there's no two ways about it. Modern North Africans, who if you've been in this channel for a little while, I give North Africans a lot of grace, because I do believe they obviously carry African blood. I don't view them as white as a lot of people do. I view them as, essentially biracial, mixed race people who have a bit of European ancestry, but also retained a bit of the African ancestry and speak an Arabic language mostly. So that's kind of my view on North African people. But even North African people, modern North Africans, their limb proportions are much more closer to being cold adapted. So they have, modern Egyptians have pretty much the 1-to-1 ratio similar to Europeans. King Tut clusters with East Africans. That's just full stop. There's just no two ways about it. Southeast Africans, kind of Kenyans, that's where King Tut's limb proportions cluster. And it's the same thing for his skull. So once again, talking about this whole disability thing, if you look at King Tut's skull, he has the elongated skull. Yeah. And they're talking about, oh, well, did he have skull compression? King Tut's skull is a normal African skull. There's nothing weird about it. Okay. In the black community, we call it a beanhead. Yeah. That's what we call it. That's what we used to call it growing up. Everyone had a brethren who was a little bit of a beanhead. Yeah. It's standard. Okay. Where you have, the top part of the skull is a little bit longer. Okay. That's really normal in African communities. And actually, if you look, when they did the research and they found the skull of Arsinoe, and they kind of Arsinoe is Cleopatra's sister. So when they found the skull of Arsinoe, they clustered it as being African, and their decision for them saying that the skull of Arsinoe was African was based on the fact that she had this kind of like longer compressed skull, i.e. European skulls tend to be taller and Africans tend to be shorter and longer. And Arsinoe's skull was shorter and longer. And they said there's only two groups of people who we see have this skull formation: Black Africans and ancient Egyptians. So Egyptologists, historians, researchers are very aware that craniometrically, i.e. skull shape, ancient Egyptians cluster with Africans. Limb proportions, ancient Egyptians cluster with Africans. In fact, on every level of biology that exists, ancient Egyptians cluster with Africans. And there's just no two ways about it. They're very aware of this. There's no secrecy about it. It's very clear and it's very open. So it's just kind of like, they'll kind of come up with these terms. So going back to the original point that I was making, they'll come up with these terms and they'll push our feature sets, the things that are normal to us, and they'll tell us that they're disabilities. They say that we got, he had, a compressed skull. No, he had an African skull. They say, oh, you got Hasberg jaw. No, he's got prognathism. They'll say he's got Marfan syndrome. No, he's just got African lips. So they've got names of disabilities for all of our features to explain why what they're trying to sell as a European or non-melanated white person looks like an African, essentially. So this is kind of what we have to deal with the way they do it. So anyway, let me get back to some of these comments. We were displaced. So let's go up. So I did Upper and Lower Egyptian dynasty. I don't know what that is in reference to. I've missed a few. Sorry, I'm gonna go back up. We will force everyone to embrace truth. Absolutely. Or we'll embrace the truth. I don't even care if they embrace the truth or not. I'm not here to convince people who are not there to be convinced. Our content is for us. This is the reason I wish we would distinguish people by nationalities or something instead of skin color. I agree, because different ethnicities of people come from different colors with the same groups. I agree. And this is one of the reasons why it's really weird. Race is such a political thing, because you get people who are phenotypically kind of like more related to black people that won't call themselves black based on religious reasons. You get this a lot in the Arab world. So you get loads of people in the Arab world who will say, I'm Arab, and they're phenotypically black. Everything about them is kind of like black, but they relate to, Arab culture. So it's just a political tool, race in of itself doesn't exist. This is one of the things that we know, that it just doesn't exist. It's just something that was created very recently to kind of divide well, not to divide. First of all, let me make this clear. Race wasn't created to divide. Race was created to monetize. Okay, it put a very small proportion of, you know, the world's population and gave them power over the entirety of the globe based on a fictitious and fallacious thing they created out of thin air. And prior to them creating that, it didn't exist. You know, there was no value to it. You know, people were actually regarded by their geolocation, where they came from. You know, someone was a Roman because they were a Roman. And you had black Romans, you had white Romans, you had brown Romans, you had all colors, but they were Roman. And you know, you didn't think you were worth more because you were a white Roman or a black Roman. And this is every society right up until the 17th or 18th century. So it's really interesting because the whole race thing is a real mind kind of it's a real mind twist, trying to think about a world where race wasn't regarded the way that we regard it now. So yeah, I agree with that. Eminem had the third with dreadlocks and Africa. Yeah, I love Eminem at the third. I can't wait to do that reconstruction. That's a good shout. I like how you describe these people by regions. That's cool. I try to. It's a bit of a slippery slope when you start speaking strictly by race, because because it's not something that we ourselves kind of inflicted upon ourselves, if that makes sense. You know, it's weird. It's weird. Anyway, we were displaced from North Africa by the Syrian Umayyad Caliphate. Yes, see, this is a really good point, and I want to talk about this one day, because you have kind of two strands of Islam in Africa. You have the Islam that was spread by Africans, and a lot of people talk about the first Islamic expansion as though it was kind of like this expanding from Arabia, and all these, you know, Arabs kind of like spread across North Africa, and there wasn't much of an expansion. Most of Islam, in the early days of Islam, when it spread across Africa and across Europe, by the way, Islam spread across Europe thoroughly. People like to talk about Africa, but Europe was an Islamic nation until the Crusades. So that's one of the things that people seem to miss on there. Yeah, Europe was largely an Islamic nation until the Crusades. Um, but Islam in Africa was spread by Africans. They converted. They weren't forced by the sword or this, that, and the other. They saw religion essentially that they liked largely, and they converted. But then you had different expansions that came, which were the Turkic and the Syrian expansions of Islam, and they were more military based. So you had the initial uptake of Islam into, you know, North Africa, into West Africa as well, Mali, parts of northern Nigeria, etc., etc., etc. And that was an embrace of a religion. That was an embrace of a style of worship. And there isn't a huge amount to suggest that it was enforced upon any of these populations. Many of those early Islamic figures that were responsible for kind of like the proliferation of Islam throughout the kind of like African world, and through, you know, throughout the Middle East, a lot of them were black people essentially. And yeah, it's only later that I think a lot of the kind of like phenotypic change of North Africa was a result of the Barbary slave trade and a result of the Ottoman expansion. I think those are the two kind of events that really had a massive impact on the phenotypic change that came, or the phenotypic shift that came in North Africa. Um, but DL, I'm sure you got loads of really good information on that and probably know a bit more than me. But yeah, thanks for sharing. They get big mad when you talk about the you said Etruscans. I'm sure you meant Etruscans, and maybe had a spell error there, or spell check there, being black. Yeah, the Etruscan civilization is a very interesting one. I took pictures, so when we do this proper museum thing, when I do this live stream again, I'm going to show you some pictures I took of the Etruscans, and also some pictures I've got in some of my books there, of the Etruscans, who definitely had black ancestry in the Etruscans. So yeah, it's really interesting. Those are the indigenous people of Europe were the same as the indigenous people of Africa, and there's been kind of a gradual change that's taken place in Europe, and there's been a few major events that have really had an impact on the people of Europe to kind of make it what it is now. But most modern Europeans descend from the Visigothic people, so the Visigoths and the Vandals. Essentially, those are the father nations, so to speak, of the modern European. They come from a very kind of like single area, and they expanded from that. So they're very aware of this. They're very aware of their kind of their the Goths and the Vandals being the father of the modern European. Um, so when we talk about Europe before the Gothic expansion, we are talking essentially about a different people. Well, that's a different discussion. I'm not doing that one right now. Family, do research on the Barbary slave trade. You will understand when in North Africa. Oh, well, I just touched on that. Thank you. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Kwafadas. I did just touch on the Barbary slave trade, and yeah, I totally agree with you. That's where the North Africa gets a lot of its phenotype from. So Barbary slave trade essentially is when slaves were taken from Europe and brought into North Africa. So that's what's kind of resulted in a lot of the current North African phenotype looking how it does. So yeah, you're spot on. OM or OMH said yes, grouping people by race was one of the worst things that was started and allowed to continue, and it's so ingrained now. I agree, because I think race has now also become common to describe ethnicities. It has, and it's not correct, is it? J Hood, what are your thoughts on the theory that geologically the map we know of and follow today is displayed incorrectly because Africa is actually upside down? See, here's an interesting one. So the North Pole has always been the North Pole, but North doesn't have to be up, if that makes sense. North could be down. So I don't have a strong opinion about that. If my answer's got to be honest to you, because I'm not sure. Maybe it makes a difference psychologically to see the map displayed in kind of the reverse orientation, because it would place South Africa at the apex of Earth, so to speak. So I kind of get it from that perspective. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion either way about it, but I do get it. I have heard the same thing. The thing about, I think some of this came from the, obviously upper and lower, so you have upper Egypt, lower Egypt, or upper Kemet, lower Kemet. But from my understanding, the upper and lower um came from the idea, we know that's the way the Nile flows. So the top of the Nile, so to speak, would be the Great Lakes region, and it flows down into the delta. But that might not be the only reason. It might very well be an orientation reason, i.e., upper being the top of the earth and lower being the bottom. So I'm willing to learn. I'm open to kind of learn more about that, because I haven't got a fixed or opinion on that. Dragon of the West, what's going on? Rather, is people DNA or culture? So DNA is a difficult one. Well, it's not a difficult one. I've got very strong thoughts about DNA. If those people have kind of like checked out my, sometimes when I comment or reply to comments of people, I don't have a lot of respect for DNA markers, i.e., SMP markers, being used to classify where people come from. I think that's pseudoscience, and I think a lot of it is being used to actually steal, and it's going to be used increasingly to kind of steal our history. There's so much people don't realize about DNA. I refuse to do DNA testing. I refuse to give them my DNA. And if I was to do DNA testing, I wouldn't give them any information about me, because if they need to ask what your ethnicity is, X, Y, Z, Y, then clearly there's something dodgy going on there. That's clearly going to influence the results that they give you. So one of the reasons I don't put a big rating on SMP markers for DNA, I do rate autosomal DNA studies. I don't rate Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA studies. So Y-DNA is the DNA that's passed from father to son to son to son to son to son. So it's a single line of DNA. And then mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that's passed from mother to daughter to daughter. So it's passed by, yeah, it's the matrilineal line, so to speak. But either of those makes up a very small portion of what makes you you. So basically, when you get your Y DNA results, they don't tell you anything about your mother. And when you get your mitochondrial DNA results, they don't tell you anything about your father. But further to that, your Y DNA results won't carry any information about your grandmother on your father's side. You're only going to get your grandfather. And the reverse is true for mitochondrial DNA. So your mitochondrial DNA results aren't going to tell you anything or aren't going to carry any data about your grandfather on your mother's side. And it keeps going up that way. So with each kind of generation that goes up, you're still only carrying data from one ancestor, but it gets wider and wider. So imagine, let's just follow Y-DNA really quickly, because this is going to be a hard one to kind of explain. Well, let me just go follow Y-DNA really quickly. Your Y-DNA you get from your father, who got it from his father, who got it from his father, who got it from his father. So from your father, by the time it's your dad, you know, your Y-DNA makes up, let's say, 50% of, you know, of that information. Go up one generation to your grandfather, it's 25%. Go up one more generation to your great grandfather, it's, you know, 12% or 1/8. You go up one more generation to your great great grandfather, it's now 1/16. Now, let's stay with me here. Let's go on the basis that every 100 years there's 4 generations. Okay, so that's like average age of 25 to have a child. That might be a bit young, but it makes it easy maths. If we go on that basis, that every generation is 25 years, by the time we get to 500 years worth of distance from where you are now, you have 1 million ancestors in a single line, that is. Yeah. So you have 1 million great 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 grandparents all contributing to your genome. Okay. That's just with a 500-year distance. 1 million people contributing to your what makes you you. Your mitochondrial DNA is 1/1 millionth of that. Your Y DNA is 1/1 millionth of that. And that's just with a 500-year distance. So to put that in perspective, when people turn around, they're like, oh, I'm this marker and that makes me white. I'm like, how does 1/1 millionth of who you are determine your race? It's impossible. The fact that you have 2 parents and your phenotype, what you look like, is a direct kind of like result of you looking half like your mom and half like your dad. It makes it impossible that a single marker can determine your race, because in 3 generations, let's say you have loads of sons, you have some sons with a white mother, some sons with a Chinese mother, some sons with a black mother. Okay, they're all going to have the same Y DNA, your DNA. But if they all go off to China, you know, Norway and Africa, and they, you know, breed with people like, you know, who you've bred with to make them, in 3 generations, you're going to have a bunch of Chinese kids running around with your Y DNA, a bunch of African kids running around with your Y DNA, and a bunch of Norwegian kids running around with your Y DNA with virtually no trace of you. So therefore, in that circumstance, how much has your markers contributed to their race? And think about how many times in history this would have happened in, you know, in a 500-year, 1,000-year, 13,000-year period. It's impossible for S&P markers to determine race. And that's why I say it's a pseudoscience. It's a total pseudoscience. And basically, they can get these markers to tell any story that they want to tell. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is the markers that we actually have, the markers that they identify, are simply markers they've chosen. Because what they'll tell you as well is that they ignore lots of markers that are very predominant, because it doesn't tell a story, basically. So if you've got a marker that's kind of like prolific in a single area, they'll ignore that marker. They're only like markers that tell a story. So, you know, if they get this marker and it kind of spreads across North Africa in a greater consistency than it does in kind of other regions. They'll say, oh, you're great, we found the North African marker. But that North African marker is only preserved, like I said, in that one line of ancestry. It's not to say that you don't carry that marker. You probably do. Everyone in the world probably carries that marker, but they might carry it. It might be in their father's mother's line. And once it hits, and once it goes out of Y DNA and hits that kind of big kind of mass in the middle that's not classified, it's just lost basically. Or it could be in their mother's father, for instance. So we could all be carriers of exactly the same marker, maybe in greater kind of frequency than it's carried in North Africa. But because they've seen something that they want, they keep that marker and it tells the tale, and they'll ignore loads of markers, loads and loads of markers that tell a story that they're not interested in telling. So the whole Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA, SMP markers thing is just database manipulation. That literally is all it is. It's database manipulation. How can we manipulate databases to tell stories? And they're always going to be favorable also to Europeans. I have to stress this because Europeans are being tested more often. So people who are doing ancestry tests tend to be Westerners. Okay, Westerners are spending loads. How many Africans do you think are spending money on ancestry tests? Maybe a few, you know, well off Africans, but by and large, most Africans aren't going to be that interested in taking ancestry tests. So because they've got a much broader data set of information on the Europeans, all of the markers that they're kind of classifying as being important markers are European markers. They're not giving us detail on kind of like very intricate African markers. It's kind of like, oh yeah, Africans, yeah, you're all E. You know, there's about 3 markers for Africa. All of mankind comes from Africa, but there's like Africa is a subgroup of the markers, and yet you kind of got European markers, which are right at the top of the kind of like the markers tree, as in like the most important. That doesn't make any sense because by their own science, life started in Africa. That's by their own science, okay? Life began in Africa and permeated out of Africa into Europe. But none of that is reflected in these DNA studies. Sorry, I know I've been rambling for ages, but as you can see, not a fan. Okay, not a fan whatsoever. Also, just another point, because I've just seen, I'm not going in order, I have to go back out for the comments, but someone just pointed out the fact that Black Americans use DNA studies to results to find out who they are. Unfortunately, you're not getting who you are because those DNA, it's another thing as well. So in terms of the way they classify the DNA results, they will classify you as Nigerian not based on the fact that you're related to Nigerians, but based on the fact that they know that the slave trade took place. Okay, as Kurumia would say, dodge the hijack. They know that the slave trade took place and Black Americans come from West Africa. And so therefore, they will classify a marker that has lots of coverage in, you know, African Americans. They'll classify that as a, thank you so much, Stephen. I really, really appreciate it. They'll classify that as a Nigerian marker, not because they've got the data that suggests it's Nigerian, but because once again, it's telling the story that they want to tell. So all these, no offense, but a lot of African Americans are walking around thinking that they're Nigerian and they're not. And I was one of the first people to say this. I was like, look, you're not all from here. We haven't got the historical record. Nigeria's population is the biggest population in Africa. Okay, we don't have a history of losing millions and millions of people. I'm not saying slave trade didn't take place, because obviously I've done stuff on the maps and stuff, and we can see that there was definitely a slave trade that took place, but that slave trade was not responsible for people in the entirety of America with Black Americans. Black Americans come from various places, and I'm not going to go into massive detail, but my personal belief, and I'm going to add that caveat, my personal belief is many are indigenous, many come from Europe, many come from Britain, many come from mainland Europe, i.e. Spain, Portugal, and a few came from Africa, different parts of Africa during the slave trade. That's it. That's my personal belief. That I think there's a lot of data to suggest that that's the case. Um, and that's my personal belief. I don't think a lot of you came from Africa, to be honest with you. I'm talking proportionally now, as by the way, as well. I don't think a lot of Americans, Black Americans, came from Nigeria. I think a lot of you were there already, and I think there's a lot of data to support that. So yeah, don't take I don't take the DNA test very seriously. They've already been to be honest with you, like they've been debunked many times, not even from the perspective that I've given, but literally they will literally tell you, geneticists will tell you these things are a joke. Literally, people have, swabbed their pets and they've come back, their pets have come back 90% Scandinavian, 15% African American, because literally they're taking the information that you've written on the card and they're kind of like putting it into their little databases, and then they're just giving you whatever to sell a story. They're selling these kits. So people expecting to kind of get their ancestry from this, you're not going to get your ancestry from them. I don't trust them one bit. And you're definitely not going to get that from, like I said, Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA. That tells you such a small amount of your story of what makes you you. The fact that something, you've got to do a test and it excludes your paternal grandmother and your maternal grandfather, you should already have a question mark there about how much data you're getting about yourself, really. But anyway, that's enough about DNA. Mine, I went on for ages. Okay, let me go back. Let me hit the comments because I haven't hit them for ages. Sorry, massive shout out to Ohm for the money and to Stephen Carter. I really appreciate the love and support. Thank you for breaking this down. Thank you for tuning in, man. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's hit some of these comments. In the US, the globe and maps we have show North America larger than Africa. Yeah, which is not, it fits in Africa quite comfortably, which is mind blowing when you realize how tiny North America is compared to the African continent. Spot on, Chris. I don't do those either. I agree. And we were talking about the DNA tester, I guess. Rumors getting full. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and genius. I appreciate it. I appreciate the feedback. Assuming no incest, that must have been to do with something. Yes. So that's so sorry. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Croy Faders, or sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Yes, obviously, assuming there's no intermingling. When I spoke about the fact that you have a million ancestors, 500 years away. Of course, it's impossible that there will be a million people concurrently living. That there would have been no kind of like intermingling. So it's got to be less than that. But the point being is that's kind of how the tree grows, which I know you understood anyway. But it's like, yeah, people just don't realize how small your Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA is, and these SMP markers they're trying to say determine race they don't determine race whatsoever. We will have to force the world to embrace the truth, because everything we build they come to destroy, and when we rise above them, this to maintain racial biblical caste that they've created. Yeah, it's difficult. I got no answer for that. Great point. Excellent DNA debunk. Thank you. I'm glad that it made sense. I've never heard it broken down this way. Good work explaining. Thank you. Black Americans are using those DNA. Yeah, so okay, so I responded to that. Let's go. Let's keep going. Black American know who we are. We are Black Americans. Absolutely. Our history in America is older than most modern African nations. And look, I'm gonna add to that point. I've always been against the term African American. I don't know how people feel about that, and I get mixed response when I say that, because it's kind of like, if you're gonna call yourself African Americans, then shouldn't white Americans have to call themselves European Americans to make it fair? I mean, and that's obviously going on the basis that you think you're from Africa. I think there's a lot of data to suggest that you're indigenous and from different places like Europe as well. But let's say you were from Africa, just on a fair basis, we know that white Americans are from Europe. So shouldn't we be calling them European Americans? I don't know. It just seems logical to me. If you have African ancestry, you can't call yourself Black. I don't know what you mean there. Don't forget Mansa Musa's voyage to America. Yes, not just Mansa Musa, but I think regular. I think that the suggestion is that there was regular visits from. Actually, here's a really interesting fact: the Quetzalcoatl, which is the I think the Mayan, yes, the Mayan god, um, has the same outfit as the Malian. I've got a picture that shows, but the Malian kind of don't want to say tribal, kind of there's a Malian ethnic dancer, and I've actually got the picture of it, and they wear the exact outfit of Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl, I think they call is one of the deities they call the feathered serpent, and they talk about his story about how he came across the sea, and when you see them, he has bright red lips, very black skin all over, and has all these tassels, and that's one of the kind of like deities in Mesoamerican culture. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, I'll share that image once I figure that out as well. I never said we don't have African ancestry. Your standard is only applied to US, but not to Jamaicans, Haitians, and Belizeans. That's interesting. Actually, there's a lot. I'm not sure how far I should go into this. If you haven't looked into, I encourage you to look into the West India Regiment, okay? Because actually, the story about where a lot of what happened in the Caribbean is hidden in that. Most Caribbeans are exiled Brits. Not all of them, but most of them are exiled Brits and exiled Irish. So the indigenous Irish and the indigenous British were exiled to the Caribbean. This is why Caribbean has a lot of corresponding names to UK cities. You find that quite a lot in the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica and Barbados. And you also get, it's such a big topic. I don't want to go into it right now, but yeah, it's quite interesting. So I'm just trying to get through these comments. A lot of people fall for this. Thank you for bringing it to light. Yeah, that's the DNA. I think being Yoruba, I recognize the phenotype. Many African Americans are of Yoruba descent. I'm Yoruba as well. I haven't met loads, but that I think are of Yoruba descent, but there certainly are a few. So I think there is some, but I don't think it's a majority. But that's just my opinion. And obviously opinions, yeah, everyone has one, so it's fine. The indigenous theory is still new to me, and I'm open to it. Technically, Jamaicans, Haitians, Belizeans are African American. They reside in Central and South America. Yeah, that's correct. I'm African American, and I honor my African blood. And you're welcome to, absolutely. Yes, they are, and we are Black Americans, and we built America from scratch. Our culture is the most influential and copied on earth. That is not a diss. Yeah, absolutely is. I mean, it influenced me as a child growing up. I love American culture. So yeah, West Africa has the same mythology as the Mayans or than the Mayans. It's also a giant serpent with feathers. Interesting. So I'd like to learn more about that, to see if I could find that serpent with feathers in West African culture. Ivan Satima spoke on the similarities. Yes, I've got that book. They came before Columbus. Ivan Van Sertima. It's a great book. Suggest you to buy it. Big shout out to Wesker Willie, by the way, one of my early supporters. Americas are continents and not a race. Yep. I really like your knowledge on these issues. Thank you very much, Wesker Willie. I used to think African was the best way to describe it rather than black. However, I guess not if you're indigenous. Yeah. See, this is the thing. So you'll see that I do that a lot. I kind of stumble a lot on my terminology. So I'll start off saying African, and then I'll go into melanated, and then I'll go, and it's really confusing, because it's like sometimes I'm not speaking about Africans, and that can get really confusing and really difficult, particularly when I'm talking about, if you look back into British history, for instance, yeah. And once again, if you're kind of a subscriber to Straight Up, by the way, look, I'm gonna say it now. If you're not subscribed to, I'm gonna do a few plugs here. Subscribe to Straight Up. There's a channel called Straight Up. Subscribe to it. I'm telling you right now, you need to do that. Kurimiao How as well. I'd suggest you subscribe to that channel. Home Team History. of course, subscribe to that channel. Mr. Imhotep, subscribe to that channel. Quelly Mika, subscribe to that channel. I'm sure I've missed a few, and I'll come back if I can think of it. But going back to straight up that channel, the reason I mentioned that is because if you go back in time to British history in particular, they were very familiar with Britain has always been very multicultural. And this is something that's been hidden in our history through whitewashing of kind of portraits and stuff. We've always had black monarchs, we've always had black populace. And this was first kind of shown to me when I started looking at the works of an artist called William Hogarth. And I was looking, he's like a 16th century artist, and he used to depict lots of multiculturalism in British society, and that was kind of an eye opener to me. Cause I was like, is no one else seeing this? This is clearly he's doing paintings, and there's black and mixed, and it wasn't just black people. It was kind of like black mixed, everything in between, all kind of like intermingled in his paintings, and that was a massive, massive eye opener to me. And then obviously over time, I started getting familiar with some of the terminology that they used. So terms like swarthy, I was told, growing up, obviously, in history, I was told by my history teachers, the term swarthy just means, that's what they used to describe kind of like, your modern day Spaniards, Arab people, people with like a slight tin, like not olivey tinged skin. And then actually I looked up the word, the etymology of the word swarthy, and it just means black. That's what swarthy means. It means black. It's the same word that German get the word Schwarz. Schwarz means black in German. So swarthy literally means black. So when someone's described as swarthy, they probably looked, like me or darker. And then you find out there's lots of different terms to describe people of different colors. So you had swarthy, you have tawny, you have seguin. So tawny's kind of like your kind of like beigey color. Swarthy's black, like I said. You had black. So and actually I found out that one of the earliest terms they used to describe dark-skinned people in Europe was blue men. So this is when people are so black they were literally blue. And I'd imagine this is what the indigenous Brits look like. People like Cheddar Man, they would have been like your blue blacks. So the people that are literally kind of like jet black to the point of being blue. I think the closest thing that we get to that in modern days is kind of like in South Sudan, where you get the very, very dark kind of Dinka people who are, almost, they're so dark they're almost blue. So all of these tones were known. They were kind of like common throughout Britain. It's common in British literature. It's common in British aristocracy for people to be brunette. Is another way they describe people. So brunettes used to be a method to describe complexion, not hair color. So brunette would, I'd imagine, be kind of like your deep brown. So there was kind of this scale of different complexion, and there was no racism. It was like, they just describe someone, as pale, they describe someone as dark, and there's no concept of race prior to, like, a few hundred years ago, like 17, 1800s is when you kind of started to see this idea of there being a race. And it's just really, really interesting. It's very, very interesting, but you can find it throughout British history. I'm going to touch on it a little bit when I do this video, when I do this live stream properly with the pictures. I'm going to touch a bit more because I'll be able to share some images to kind of like give some back into some of the stuff I've said. Okay, let's go. I'm going to hit some more of the comments again. Bear with me. I'm trying to make sure where we. Okay, I think I've got to here. I believe Jesse Jackson coined the term African American. Yeah, we could go into that one. I don't think that was a great thing to do. I think it's good to be proud of your African roots if you have them. But I just don't think, I think it was counterproductive. I think might as well be called American. Alona James, I know that we have African ancestry and it's in all our best interest to unite around blackness. Yep, I don't see why not. I recommend studying the finds of Ivan Valsettima. I do as well. Really good book. There are a lot of Igbo here. Yeah, there are. Agree with your point on the because European, because indigenous here. we call people South American or Asian or Australian, LOL. Deaf ought to be called European because not indigenous here. So I guess you're talking about when I said that European Americans should be called European Americans. I agree with that, but they get to call themselves American, which I think is one of the things that is a bit, you know, you're always going to be classified as a minority if you have a prefix attached to your name, aren't you? This is one of the problems. Olmecs are from West Africa, Mandingos. See, that's interesting. I, um, I'm actually ashamed to say that I wasn't aware of the Mandingo as a people until I did that research on maps really recently. It's just a term that I'd heard thrown around. And I had no idea about the history of the kingdom, the Mandingo kingdom. So this is something I definitely need to look into. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Keith. Is there enough evidence for people who are black in America that can trace the ancestors to a plantation to believe we originated somewhere in Africa? We know the plantation, our our 5 times great grand was. I'm not sure what you meant there. Sorry if I did that comment this justice. I probably read it wrong. Whence the Black Irish of America by Joseph J. Williams. Yeah, you need to check that out. You need to check that out. I met someone at the gym recently, and he had it was a black guy with blue eyes. And I asked him, where's he from? He said, Barbados. And I said to him, do you have any Irish in your blood? And he said, how do you know that? Yeah, we definitely got Irish ancestry. I said, do you know your ancestry is probably black Irish? And he was like, you know what? I may have heard something similar, but I never took it seriously. And he started telling me all of the muck names that he has. No disrespect. I can't remember what he said, like Macduff and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, you probably descend from black Irish people. Because the reason I say that is because the black Irish were known for being dark skinned with blue eyes. And it was a very unique phenotype that had developed, indigenously in Ireland. And they all ended up obviously, being, on plantations across the West Indies and in America. But that kind of unique dark skin with blue eyes was a very much a Irish trait. So this is why I made a guess and it ended up being correct. But I kind of knew that I was right. I knew that I'd met this kind of blue-eyed, dark skinned, well, not dark skinned, it's kind of like, caramel toned, black guy at the gym. And I just knew there was just something about his look. I was like, yeah, he's probably a descendant of the Black Irish. So I found that really interesting. What's the name of the channel again? And let me know below if you need me to go through those channel names again. But Straight Up is a good one. Kurimiawa How is a good one. Kweli Mika is a good one. Home Team History is a good one. Mr. Imhotep's a good one. Check them all out. We're doing really good work. I learned the term Afro-descended people from Home Team History. Yep, great channel. The Olmec stoneheads in modern-day Mexico even suggest we were in the Americas dated back then. From a lot of studies I come across, I read a great portion of Black Americans are of Bantu lineage. See, that's quite interesting because there's not many Bantus in Nigeria. A lot of people don't realize that. Okay, Nigeria is not a Bantu-speaking nation. We have a lot of Niger Kordofan in Nigeria. We have a lot of Afro-Asiatic speakers. We have some Nilo-Saharan speakers. We have barely any Bantu. Bantu speakers start from around Cameroon, I believe, and southwards, but we don't have any in Nigeria. But yet they tell you that all African Americans come from Nigeria. And like I keep saying, we just don't have we do not have the record. We do not have the historical record in Nigeria of losing that many people. There were some, but yeah, it does the maths. It doesn't math. The math don't math. So yeah, it's interesting. Where are we? So I'm trying to get through the comments. There's loads on here. Black people indigenous to America is not a thing. I don't know. I think I disagree, but there you go. Straight Up has done godlike research. I agree. Definitely check him out. Straight Up channel is real good. I myself have ancestry from Ghana. My family is from Geechee, from the Carolinas. That's fantastic. Um, I get Mr. Imhotep posts recommended to me all the time. I just realized I wasn't subbed though. LOL. Just got here. Welcome, Adam. Okay, Henry says, wow, nice one. Yeah, one that really gets me was the Renaissance dressing designed to mimic big butt. Yes, yes, absolutely. That couldn't have been a trend without black people. Look, you're laughing, Wesker, but you're spot on. You know, in the it's not just that. So Wesker really is just pointing out the fact that, you know, in the Renaissance they have this kind of thing to kind of exaggerate the female posterior, so to speak. You know, you've probably seen those dresses. Come on, where does that come from? Where would that trend have come from? You know, did Kim Kardashian time travel and give them all, you know, lifts? Or more than likely, you know, that kind of body shape was something that became attractive and something that was common. And it's not just that, by the way. Think about the trends of the aristocracy. So going back to England now, I know we're talking about England quite a lot, but hey, I'm English, to deal with it. Going back to the aristocracy, think about trends that you have in England. Think about the wigs that judges wear. What if you haven't seen them? You could just Google now, you know, a judge's wig in England. Okay, Google a barrister's wig in England, and tell me what hair texture it looks like they're trying to imitate there. It certainly is Afro hair texture. And you have to think, well, where did this trend come from? Why would they, if there wasn't a black aristocracy, why would there be a need to have hair like a black person or melanated person in order to be a judge or in order to be a barrister? Why would that need to be the case? You know, these are things we have to seriously ask questions about. You know, are they coincidence? It's highly unlikely. It's highly, highly unlikely. There's a lot of trends that we carry in the UK, even the hats of the royal guards. I can't remember what they're called, but those kind of like big bearskin hats. Okay, those were based on, you know, coverings that would have been filled with hair, essentially. So there's a lot of kind of these trends that we have in UK aristocracy that clearly trace back to natural melanated hairstyles, but you know, now are just kind of have been lost to time. Didn't the concept of race begin with the Atlantic slave trade? No, I think it began slightly after, surprisingly enough, because the Atlantic slave trade was one of many trades that took place between Africa and Europe, and it actually didn't begin with the Atlantic slave trade. It became a thing afterwards. But that's a very good question. Have you seen Nazlik Keita African reconstruction from Egypt dated 33,000 years ago? I have not, but I will check it out. Thank you for that, Mont. Glenda Palm says, I haven't heard that. Okay, I'll skip that one because I haven't got anything to contribute. Whites do call themselves Irish American, Italian American. Well, Dina said whites do call themselves Irish American, Italian American. Only ones who have been, you know, a few generations or who have built up communities. But you won't see any of them call themselves English Americans or Pilgrim Americans. Yeah, and they make up quite a large core of the, you know, the ones who call themselves Italian Irish Americans. From what I know, and my American history isn't up to scratch, but they are very recent, i.e., post 1800s. They were brought in to bolster the white community after the invention of racism because they realized they were greatly outnumbered by the melanated people. So they started to basically open their borders quite extensively to Italy and, you know, Ireland, different, you know, nations that had become white, to in order to bolster the numbers of kind of the white population. And that's when you got these recent Italian American, Irish American communities. They certainly weren't a part or the foundation of the nation um like the melanated Americans or the early, you know, English pilgrims. And that's, you know, the question is, why do the people of kind of the white English pilgrims get to call themselves Americans, and the black, whoever they are, I'm not going to go into that, but the black or the melanated people have to call themselves African Americans when, you know, if we're going to go by their version, everyone came from somewhere else. It's just, I don't know, it's quite interesting. And all due respect, when a Irish American's filling out a form, you know, an ethnicity form, do you think they put Irish American on there? I doubt it. They probably just put white American. There probably is no option for Irish or Italian American. It's probably just white American or African American. And this is where the issue kind of comes in. But anyway, I'm sure you know all that. I'm just kind of like rambling now. I must say as well, dark skin, melanate skin people. Christy said, meaning that the vast majority of African Americans can trace their ancestry to a specific plantation. We can. Okay. J Hood says Sheikh Anta Diop is another brilliant master teacher. Of course, he was the original African origin of civilization, right here. My favorite book, or one of my favorite books. Proved beyond a shadow of a doubt the ethnicity of the ancient Egyptians. Thank you, those of you in the comments who have been helping people with the spelling of some of those channels, which because I've just been talking. Somehow in America use the term African born in America. Yeah, without history, that's quite a new one they're doing. Yeah, that's a good channel. That's a good channel as well. Black people are absolutely indigenous to America. YouTube has a video of the oldest called Lucia. I've seen that. So Lucia's, I actually mentioned Lucia's reconstruction in one of my videos recently. Okay. Well, they did that in Argentina too. Argentina's a really sad story about what they did to the indigenous community and the kind of melanated community there. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that. That's a big one. They call themselves WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They still do. Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that term, but I know it now. So thank you for sharing, D. They use the term Anglo extensively throughout history. They do, absolutely. Hello, thanks for your educational videos and reconstructions. Question, can you tell me the song used in your King Tut reconstruction? Oh, gosh. Which one? Is that my short? You're gonna have to be a bit more specific, Miss Berry, so I kind of know which one you're talking about, and I'll tell you which one it is. In America, we identify race first. Yeah, you certainly do. You're pretty much on point about the Italians. At first, the white Anglo-Saxon whites looked down on them. They often established their own ethnic neighborhoods. Agree. The hip hop on one of the short. I think I know what you're talking about. I think that's a track called Billie Eilish. The track, not the artist, the track is called Billie Eilish. I can't remember what the artist is called. But if you look for a song called Billie Eilish, you'll find it. I think that's the one that you're talking about. By the way, I have no idea where I got that tune. Normally, I just hear something on TikTok and I'll just be like, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm using that. All right. I'll be going on for 1 hour, 22 minutes now. I might wrap it up because I feel like I could have done a much better live if I had organized, well, if I had got my pictures working. So bear with me. I'm going to do another live within 24 hours, and that one is going to be with the pictures. I'm going to be taking you through what I saw at the British Museum and some things that I think are going to be really eye-opening. And it'll be a better organized live than this one. But I really, really thank everyone for tuning in. It's been fantastic, to be honest with you. I've really enjoyed it. Totally unplanned. Yeah, I'll be in contact tomorrow. So stay tuned. Thank you very much, community. And I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you very much, D. I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks for the kind feedback, guys. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to lock it off now. Thanks so much, guys. Chat to you soon. See you later. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.